Hello, I'm Kathleen O'Toole, Takoma Park's Poet Laureate, and I'm honored to introduce a new online reading, Black Voices in Verse, from Takoma Park Arts by the City of Takoma Park, Maryland. Like so many other arts and performance organizations, we had to suspend in-person readings in March. However, you can find previous poetry readings and other music and performance events that are available online, or sign up for our weekly newsletter to get information on upcoming Takoma Arts events at www.takomaparkmd.gov/arts. Since April, we've been bringing you the poets who were scheduled to read in our Third Thursday series this spring in recorded readings. In June, we decided to hit the pause button in order to organize a reading that would feature local Black poets and poetry that speaks out of and into the movement against police violence, for racial justice, and inclusion, including in the arts. We are blessed to have 3 amazing poets share their powerful work with you this month, which will also be available online if after viewing you'd like to share the link with others. The 3 poets: Saida Augustini, a queer Afro-Guyanese poet whose work explores the ways that Black folks harness mythology to enter the fantastic. Saida's poetry has been featured in Barrel House magazine, the Black Ladies Brunch Collective's anthology, Not Without Our Laughter, and other publications. Her first poetry collection, Just Let the Dead In, was a finalist for several national poetry prizes. Kyle Dargan is an associate professor of literature and assistant director of the creative writing program at American University. He is the author of 5 collections of poetry. The most recent was awarded the 2019 Lenore Marshall Prize and longlisted for the 2019 Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. Kyle has also received the Cave Canem Poetry Prize, the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, and grants from the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities. You have links to their websites in the notice for this reading. I am especially thrilled to introduce our 3rd poet, Takoma Park's own Emily Kombe, my neighbor, a rising sophomore public policy major at the University of Maryland, who was introduced to slam poetry 5 years ago. Emily strongly supports the use of slam poetry and the arts for social change. The poem Emily will read tonight, I first heard in a performance, part of Sankofa at Montgomery Blair High School a couple of years ago, and I know you'll be as moved as I was. I'd like to begin with a very short poem of Lucille Clifton's, my friend, an elder, mentor, and the person who charged me to explore in my own poetry the ways in which white privilege and racism is a part of my own history. And I feel that this poem, which she wrote in the aftermath of 9/11, speaks into today's moment in inviting all of us to grieve and act. Friday, 9/14/01. Some of us know we have never felt safe. All of us, Americans, weeping, as some of us have wept before. Is it treason to remember? What have we done to deserve such villainy? Nothing, we reassure ourselves. Nothing. Please welcome Saida, Kyle, and Emily.
Hi, my name is Saida Agostini. I'm really excited to be taking part in this reading by Takoma Park Arts. I'll be reading you a few poems today, and the first poem I'll be reading is called 2 Fat Black Women Are Making Love, which is part of my exploration of jokes that I think that have been made to kind of hurt me and me trying to take back that power. Here we go. 2 Fat Black Women Making Love. And the joke is right there, ready, shuddering, and alive, rife with promise. There are so many paths that have been worn out for a quick, easy laugh. Tyler Perry strutting with a gun and wig, screaming rotund and loud like Medea would, Martin calling out "your mama" on television, or the meme of a young woman shot underhand, her belly in love with the tight skirt, hands moving towards an open mouth. Look at everything she devours. Imagine it. Does it make you hungry too? Two fat black women are making love on a bed on the floor, and they are weeping for joy. They are crying great folds of flesh, flushing and shaking. One cannot look in the mirror save for thinking of her daddy, all this ugly and skinned together, counts the men who say they hate her body as they do bitter cops and dead black boys. Two fat black women are making love, and they touch each other like they can hold it. Honeyed, profane body, like patriots, like their bodies have never been folded into freezers, screamed at on streets, coaxed or threatened, sweet, like they have names, like we will know them. These poems that I'm reading you specifically come from my manuscript, Just Let the Dead In, where I do a lot of exploration, which I think a lot of poets do, particularly in their first manuscript, about family. And I think for a lot of Black families, and for me, my family comes from Guyana, a country in South America, there's a lot of shame around talking about our histories. And that's always been really hard for me because I think even in the most difficult and ugliest times, there's a lot of beauty that can be found. And when we don't acknowledge our history, I think that's like where the real pain and wounding comes in. And so for this, there's an epigraph for the poem, which is called Notes on Archiving Erasure, and it's from James Baldwin, who I like to pretend is my godfather. And it says, "Love does not begin and end the way we think it does. Love is a battle, love is a war, love is a growing up. When I say I love my family, what I mean is I worship the battle. You can't wish away creation or reorder blood. Childishly, I thought we could retell stories. I mean to say, I can't lie. In truth, there are wretched days I call my sister and ask, was this real? Did this happen? She says nothing. Part of love can be called refusing to answer. My mother says, let things lie. She means murder it. Let our shame be a suffocating vine. We were made to believe that everything we bore was ugly, a family of shell-shocked gods fleeing their own clay. Yet I will come back to the door of our own home, sit at its steps, fall in love with the slow order of our creation, the seasons it took to urge kindness into our natures, how we won glory even as the city fell." So the next poem I'll be reading to y'all is actually from a newer project that I'm working on about Nellie Jackson. She is a badass Black woman who operated her own brothel in Natchez, Mississippi for about 60 years. If you get a chance, you should Google her. And a lot of her work was actually laying the ground for freedom fighters. So she bailed out freedom fighters. She spied on the Ku Klux Klan for the FBI. And I also love the way that she explores pleasure. So anyways, this poem is called Nelly Speaks on Original Sin. And there's an epigraph from a Dinah Washington song. I want to be loved with inspiration. Late summer nights are spent exhaling hot smoky circles into Mississippi black. My girdle pressed straight into the curl of my ruddy belly, as insolent as a man's hands. I love rough familiarity, the blues hot throb I get from even the pastor's measured smile when I trespass again into the church's door. Spend hours dreaming of what just the promise of soft flesh can drive a good girl to do. Why feign ignorance at what's between our thighs? The joys a lazy hour can bring, honeyed, hushed, rocking, rushing a lover into the very wick of me. Any Bible worth its salt will tell you my want is wicked, yet I'll go back, taste Eve's apple 1,000 times, kneel before her, abashed in praise, a bad woman, flushed with grace. This poem is really close to home for me. Well, I guess all of my poems are. Brescia Meadows is a young black girl from Ohio who killed her abusive father. She and her family were all in fear of their lives from him. And she, at first, the prosecutors attempted to put her in jail for the rest of her life and charge her as an adult at the age of 14. An ensuing organizing effort eventually led to her being freed. And it just really spoke to me as someone who's a survivor. So this is called Brescia Meadows Speaks on Divinity. God is a black girl who once had to kill her own father. Say the social workers listened with kind white eyes as she wept, her bare skin a constellation of ripening bruises. Say God shuddered on walks home, ran away 15 times before she was 13, sat in tight airless rooms, hustled up in sleeping clothes and stank breath, repeated her rosary. He beats us, he beats us, he beats us, he beats, he beats, he beats. How the counselors shook their heads, asked questions like, does he hit you with an open or closed hands, buttoned their good woolen coats in the blind Ohio winter, and took her back home. When God comes to school, wailing, breaking chairs, screaming, he will kill me, a chorus of white women hover round her, confused lovely angels pronouncing her name a supplication. God cut herself to remember or forget how history changes. He will kill me to, are you sure? How she dreamt at night of trees and running, her mother's head cleft into galaxies of blood, her father's hands thick, dark, laughing rocks, carving their flesh again and again. Her mother, begging her not to tell, says, he will kill me. And God can't stop imagining the sweet jump of a trigger. God cried over her father sleeping, gun in hand, how the bullets exited the chamber, how he died saying her name, God bloody and keening on the floor, her mother screaming, a break knitted into the end of a heartbeat, God's arms around her father. God is a black girl in love with living, a sacrament on how to be disbelieved, forgotten, and rise 1,000 times. So the last poem I want to read to you is probably just something that I think a lot of us have. It's just hearing from the stories of our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers. It's a theme that comes up a lot in my work, and this is actually both in my manuscript and also in an anthology that I'm a part of, the Black Ladies Brunch Collective, Not Without Our Laughter. You should definitely check it out. And it's called Great Granny's Last Night. Beyond her window, she can hear the strains, men leaving the fields, singing in anticipation of another night, sweet with food and women, their faces tender with sweat, ringed in mud, hands gripping machetes, blades swung upwards towards a dimming sun. Her pipe lays packed and unsmoked by her bed, clean sheets huddled round her, cups of milky tea and weeping held quiet in the next room. Granny will tell me all she saw that night. Death, a great horn thing sitting side by side with God in one small cramped room by a huge dark river. The birds cawing in blue ecstasy. Elvis's Love Me Tender played on repeat until even the record player begs for relief. The pick worn down with playing lyrics so tired they can't help but be real. Elvis in a glittery jumpsuit and heels wailing, for my darling, I love you. And when he hits that high note, pulls away the mic, crooning, love me true. Even death and God dance together, weep in each other's embrace, smiling for an old woman losing breath as the time bears down. She says, I just need him to forgive one last thing. Made her body a confession, hand stretched out in the air towards a white, white road filled with flowers, fruit, and light. No work or babies to deliver, just linemen and a shining, laughing death ready to deliver her, a squalling, wrinkly child. Thank you so much.
Hello, Takoma Park, a place that I always get lost when I'm trying to find while I'm driving. Um, my name is Kyle Dargan. I am a poet located in Washington, D.C. I also teach at American University in our MFA program and literature department. I was asked to read some poems to speak a bit to the moment in terms of what's happening with racialized violence and state/police violence directed towards Black and brown people. And I'll do some of that. But I think one of the things that this larger moment with COVID and what's going on in the country politically has shown us is that really all of these things are connected, right? We think about health outcomes, we think about guns, we think about police violence, right? I talked to some of my friends who are also Black or African American at the beginning of COVID, and many expected that the quarantine and other things will result in some things that we've been seeing, right? So I know this word comes up a lot lately, and not everyone has a strong grounding in it, but intersectionality. But really the way, like, there is no single issue. All of these things bear upon each other. So with that in mind, I'm going to read around a bit, maybe 4 poems that touch on a few of these things and some that speak to police violence specifically. But that's also my experience as a Black writer, right? It's not just that I'm, just thinking about the police all the time, although I am often thinking about the police. But I'm also thinking about health disparities and gentrification and political disenfranchisement and all of these things that come together. So I'd rather read some poems that touch on some of that too. This first poem is called State of the Union, which many of us in the area, I'm sure, are familiar with in a particular way. Some of you may be familiar with the concept of the designated survivor, or the one member of the presidential cabinet that always has to stand away from the State of the Union. So in the case that there's an emergency, there'll be someone from the cabinet who can run the government. So that's referenced in the piece. And aside from that, I think the rest you should be able to follow. State of the Union. I live in a land called East of the River, 5 miles from the U.S. Capitol, where airspace must still be policed. No fly zones. Tonight, a helicopter freezes into a shallow star blinking above my house, while the men and women of government herd themselves inside the Senate chambers, our commander-in-chief and all his cabinet, except one, traditionally one, who is excluded and tasked with waiting to resurrect our country should Iran, Russia, China, or what's left of Iraq try to bowl a ballistic 710 split, toppling the monument and Capitol. Tonight, it's the Agriculture Secretary's duty to save us. It should always be our Agriculture Secretary. In times of crisis, a country needs, before commerce or war or law, to eat. And if Congress has allowed the appointment of an Agriculture Secretary who cannot grow a pea, then might we not deserve oblivion? I prefer to imagine our Secretary of Agriculture hunkered in its undisclosed location, listening to the speech on battery-powered radio, sifting seeds through his dusty palms, deciding what must grow first in the aftermath of fire. I've twice participated in cultural exchange between America and China over the last 10 years. And some poems came out of that, more in my most recent book, and a few which sort of began my process and the experience in my 4th book, Honest Engine. And this is one of those poems. Cormac McCarthy as translation. We are in Iowa City, reading The Road, when Xiao Fan gently scolds us. You Americans, always worried for, always in need of saving the world. Were it not for the fact that I know his sense of the American narrative is steeped in bootleg Michael Bay cinema from a Shanghai back alley contraband cave he'll drag me inside months from now, I would consider his critique. Maybe some of wisdom's breath wafts within what he says. Maybe he can see us clearly, our bald-faced nationhood, here against an unadorned middle America. Our God complex so obvious when wreathed with lush amber and green stalks. Another misconception that would be, for there is no such middle America. Everywhere, and the need to be everywhere, has no middle. And yes, planet America requires saving. Maybe that is why our stories all begin with the world almost ending here. That keeps us up at night, shatters our sleep, which Xiao Fan can't grasp because he was never taught our Pottery Barn rule, that if you saved it, then you've broken it, then it's yours. This next poem is a ghazal, some say a Persian form, some say an Asian form, which works in couplets, and there's a consistent refrain that comes at the end of each couplet. They're supposed to be unrelated in a way that each couplet can stand alone, and the final couplet, the poet is tasked with invoking themselves by name. My ghazal is called Points of Contact. Name one revolution whose inception was unlike a fist. Factions disparate, then tucked together, coiled like a fist. Foreign policies are symbol languages, idiomatic, cryptic. In America, nothing says we desire peace like a fist. The heart is a one-man rave in the body's industrial district. Blood-drunk and insomniac, it pumps towards sleep like a fist. Mammogram magic revealed my lover's dense breast. Behind each nipple I kissed, a soft knot threatened her like a fist. Our universe's yet shattered mysteries fear the astrophysicist. Damn his galaxy's thick glasses, his mind relentless like a fist. Like a glove, the young groom exalts his wife's love. It's fit, sounds romantic. He means sex, her love's grip like a fist. An unfocused punch, Kyle, wrist a broken hand or wrist. So laden the psyches of men, father, must I also think like a fist. And this last poem more overtly reflects upon police violence, and fittingly it opens with an epigraph from Pakistani-American poet Fatima Asghar, which is, "Goal for today, for the rest of my life, weaponize happiness." La Petite Mort. Many of us are here today because it is difficult to maneuver when experiencing an orgasm. My friend, responding to his girlfriend's laments about their second infant, shouted, "Well, I told you to get off of me." It was a futile warning. The boy is God knows how many years old now. Life goes on. That's the point. After the little death, life goes on. We live in a world of tasers, of tranquilizer darts and anesthesia, By accident, these things kill us on occasion, that big death, the one from which none have returned, wherein your flesh seizes, clams, but never reanimates. Then there are the guns, which, well, I cannot explain guns beyond the intent to call forth the big death. But if all we need is a means to slow or subdue people, why not give the police orgasm guns? Think of it. Whose legs turn fluidly while the brain is taken by a stampede of endorphins? Who is a threat with spastic genitals? I am reimagining the past 4 years. Rather than cues of choppy footage in which men and women are deaded point blank by police, I see bodies buckling and dropping to the pavement, mouths gushing expletives, though none in pain. The cops could even shoot the Caucasian killers, who they infrequently shoot. They would still live to be later gassed or injected to death, which we call a penalty, a process much slower than what skips over judgment to execution, bursts prematurely through the thoraxes of brown people. I cannot afford to believe that someday these states will stop shooting my cousins. So let there be another weapon, one that induces only the small death. Yes, my cousins would come against their wills, but they would come back, unlike this big leaving, this spasm without release. Thank you for listening, and please stay safe. Goodbye.
Hi everyone, I hope you're doing as well as you can be during this time. My name is Kombe, and I'm really excited to be participating in this event. I think poetry is not only great for uniting us during this isolated time, but also a vehicle for social justice, which hopefully you'll see in my poem. I wrote my poem, Black Jesus, after I'd been studying the Bible as a piece of literature, and had been noticing similarities between Jesus' death and the unjust killing of Black people by the police. During that time, there was also the social media controversy over whether Jesus was a person of color. And so I wanted to write a piece addressing both of those things and showing that Jesus had to have been Black because he died the blackest way possible. I think this piece is still really relevant to right now, and I hope you enjoy. This poem is for Mother Mary. See, I think we forget sometimes how much strength she truly possessed. How even without powers, she could stretch a loaf of bread into a meal for an entire family. How she could heal people with just her hands, because sometimes that's all we got. How even our Creator needed a Black woman to make someone as holy as Jesus, and yet they still had the nerve to write her out the Bible. Jesus died the way most Black boys do, his hands white flags in the air screaming surrender to the law, and yet still died red. That night, Mary anointed his head in oil, because every Black mother knows ash is the language of the dead. Do you remember how they hung him like the strange fruit he was? Blood blowing in the southern breeze, staining the poplar tree turned cross. Ain't it funny how no one said Jesus was just in the wrong place at the wrong time? How they deemed it God's will like they deemed Freddie Gray's death inevitable. I bet Pontius sold the crimson nails the same way Zimmerman sold his gun. Does it always take a brown boy's death to start a movement, the way they resurrect his name after he's laid to rest, because there is no Christianity without Christ's death? Tell me what is left after they divide black boy from black body, after they divide black body from cross, from noose, from chalk outline. I'm starting to think it's easier to worship a black boy when he's dead than to love him while he's alive. I want to know if Mother Mary forgave herself. If at night she wandered her son's room looking for a piece of him they had forgotten, praying into his pillowcase with her tears, what does a black mother think of when she says amen? Does she still believe there is a God after her miracles are taken from her? Like a black mother has the privilege to fall apart after tragedy. Like Mary wasn't outside the executioner's house each day protesting. Like her work ended when her son's life did. This poem is for all the Mother Marys, because their stories aren't in the dying, they're in the rising. They have taught us the biggest miracle of all, enduring the greatest suffering and still surviving. Thank you.